Okay, everybody, good morning. Welcome back. Thank you guys for tuning in right now and being here today. We've got about 4 minutes, and then we will resume our lecture series and get started. Well, dive a little deeper, I guess, into the work of John Stuart Mill. So we got our plan for the day. Hope you guys are having a good morning so far, and just get comfortable, and we'll be ready to go in a couple minutes. Hey, Eddie. Hi. Cats are out and about. Peachy. All right, just a couple more minutes. Good morning, guys. Hi, Eva, Senna, Eddie. No. Good morning, Lily. Just two cats, brother and sister. Here's Eddie. You guys know Eddie. Big boy. They're getting bigger. I mean, you guys, it's kind of like throughout the semester, if they keep popping up during these lectures, you're going to kind of see them growing because they're born on March 29th. So when the semester started, they're like 5 months old. So by the time this semester's done, I mean, it's almost like that'll be double their lifespan. Like they'll be up to about 8 or 9 months. So there'll be significant growth. And Eddie's getting bigger all the time. You can see he's trying to eat this book, but he's not even 6 months old, but he's a big boy. He's like 8 pounds already. We'll see though. What's going on with you, boy? Yeah. Good morning. A couple more moments and we'll just get our lecture meeting started. Hi, everyone. Eddie, you gonna hang out today? All right. Hello. All right, guys, so it's 9 a.m. I'll let us get started. Welcome back. Good morning to one and all. Hope you guys are doing well. So we have our basic idea today, which is to go through the notes on John Stuart Mill and the ethical theory of utilitarianism. So I kind of want to just bring you back up to speed on that topic for a minute. As we all know, we've covered one subject so far in pretty good depth, and that was the philosophy of religion. Now we're moving on to ethics. So we're embarking on this second big unit of the course, starting last meeting Monday, but now really in earnest today. Okay, so ethics, as we've known, is the study of morality and moral concepts. So whenever we think of concepts, terms, ideas about things like right and wrong, good and bad, moral versus immoral, just versus unjust, how you should act as opposed to how you should not act, and that whole cluster of concept and idea is all related to ethics. And we talked about the three major categories of moral action. We talked about morally permissible, morally impermissible, morally obligatory actions. Let me know. Did that get covered yet? Okay, good. Yeah, so I mentioned that morally impermissible acts are the acts which are wrong and they're not okay to do. Then there are morally permitted acts. Morally permissible actions are those that are not wrong and they are okay to do, and then morally obligatory actions are not. So, of course, there certainly are things that are impermissible: killing, stealing, cheating, genocide, torture, all kinds of horrible things. Then there are acts that are morally permissible: attending a class lecture, writing a poem, I don't know, calling a friend, making food, you know, so all kinds of stuff is morally permitted. And then morally obligatory would be things that you may not refuse to do. So they're obligations, in other words, like keeping a promise. If you, let's say, ordered a meal at a restaurant, I would argue, and of course probably you agree, you're morally obligated to pay at the end. It's not that that's something that you may do, but you must. Now we also discussed the difference, I think, between legal and moral obligations, perhaps. Legally speaking, you know, we have legal obligations, but sometimes there's a difference between law and morality. Like there could be laws that are unjust in and of themselves, and then there could be some actions that are prohibited under the law, but the actions are not really immoral. So, of course, legislators are fallible human beings. That means that the content of law is not always going to track with, you know, some enlightened sense of morality in 100% of cases. So, like it's the case of slavery, for example. You know, that was legal at the time, but of course it was wrong morally. And people who had, let's say, freed slaves would have been, quote unquote, breaking the law back then, but they were doing something righteous and moral. So we can always know there's a little difference between law and morality. Law should take its inspiration from morality, but sometimes, of course, we'll get conclusions and legal standards that deviate from what we think is right and wrong. Okay, so anyway, then we start talking about Mill. And now that's where we're going to kind of come back into focus. John Stuart Mill is one of the first authors we're going to study on the topic of ethical theory. So ethical theories are attempts to craft conditions and criteria which place actions in the different moral categories: morally impermissible, permissible, or obligatory. And I told you guys about the first major basic principle of utilitarian ethics, which is that what should you always do? You should always act in whatever way that would create the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So it's all about trying to take the action which would promote the maximum overall balance of pleasure minus pain. Let me give you a little bit more depth now as to why he thinks this is the correct moral standard. So remember what I said, that utilitarianism in a nutshell is telling you that you should always act to produce the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. But why, though? Why would a person think this is the correct moral approach to live by? Well, he gives a couple of reasons for that. So for one, he defends the principle he defends the theory with this principle, which he calls the greatest happiness principle. So we're talking here about the ideas of this man. Wait, sorry, wrong spelling. Not like the former host of The Daily Show, but John Stuart Mill. And we're talking about his theory of utilitarianism. Okay. And utilitarianism, as you've learned and as I wrote in the previous meeting, says that the right action is the action that creates the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. But what supports that? Well, one thing that supports it is what is called the greatest happiness principle. And what the greatest happiness principle says is that actions are right to the extent that they promote happiness, and actions are wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse of happiness. So I'll put that here. So there we have written the greatest happiness principle, and we'll just examine it for a moment. What it says, as you can read, is that actions are right, meaning morally right. So actions are morally right to the extent that they promote happiness, meaning that, you know, to the extent that, to the degree that they promote happiness, they're good things to do. So if an action promotes more pleasure or happiness, it's better, and if it produces less, then it's not as good. But the more and more morally right it is. And the same goes with the opposite. So what makes an action wrong morally is how much it promotes the reverse of happiness. So to the extent that an action has consequences that result in the reverse of happiness, that makes it a bad, wrong thing to do morally. And the more and more of the reverse of happiness that it promotes, then the worse and worse that it is. Now, a quick note on the usage here and the underlying meaning of the terms happiness and the reverse of happiness, because there's a specific meaning attached to that which is given by the utilitarians. So let me explain that. Now we've seen the principle, so I can clear this. Okay, so what is really intended by the terminology used of happiness and the reverse of happiness? Okay, so happiness under the definition provided here is simply pleasure in the absence of pain. All right, so if that's what happiness is thought to be, pleasure and the absence of pain, then what do you figure would be the reverse of happiness? You can pretty much just deduce it by taking the contrapositive of this. So if happiness is pleasure and the absence of pain, then the reverse of happiness would be what and what, you think? Let's see if anyone can get that in the chat. Happiness, pleasure and absence of pain. Reverse of happiness, blank and blank. What do you think those two things would be in this second definition below? Pain in the absence of pleasure. Good, Megan, yes. All right, so therefore, basically what I'm telling you is that happiness in the way it is understood according to the theory of utilitarianism is more or less interchangeable or synonymous with pleasure and the deprivation of pain. And the reverse of happiness is just the contrary, pain and taking pleasure away. So when it says in the greatest happiness principle that actions are right to the extent that they promote happiness and they're wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse, now we can return to the principle using these definitions and understand it in good detail. What it means is that when you go out into the world and you do things, you act, if you do an act that creates pleasure or takes pain away, that's generally thought of as a good thing morally. And if it does more of that rather than less, then it's judged better morally. On the other hand, if a person goes out into the world and does an action which does the opposite, which causes pain to people, or takes the pleasure that they already had away from them, then that's thought to be bad and wrong morally. And the more and more that it does, then the worse and worse that it is. It's not a perfect illustration, but let me just try to give you some substance to that. Think about it this way. Like if a person took a risk of their life to rescue people from a burning building, right? They saw there's people in there and there's no other way for them to escape unless they took initiative, go in and put their own life at risk. Say they go in there and they're able to save like one child from the household, and that causes them to no longer die from the fire. Now, that's good, right? Because they prevented that person's death, and therefore all the pleasure they would have ever had throughout the remainder of their life, getting married, having kids, graduating college, having a good career, you know, seeing their child walk, whatever, all those things that would have been canceled because they would have died right then, they didn't get canceled out. So all that future pleasure has been preserved, and that's a good thing. Now, if the person saved 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, his moral record is just getting better and better because it just kind of compounds how good it was, the better and better it is. Now, I'm not saying that you have to save lives or whatever to be evaluated morally according to this theory. It could just be, you know, I don't know, you do anything in some level of your life that helps produce pleasure. Helping them. Maybe you just help, you know, tutor kids, or you're just your little brother with his homework, you know, or maybe you help an elderly person across the street just on one single occasion. But whatever it is that you're doing, the utilitarian advises you to keep in view the quotient, the degree to which this act would produce pleasure. And the more that it would, the better it would be. Now, on the other hand, if a person did something like the opposite, say they set the fire, that these people are trapped in their house now, you know, at danger from the fire. If they did that and, you know, it was a family of 2, of course, that's a terrible thing. This person that is basically has killed them, and it's bad. It's morally wrong, and we understand that. If there was a family of 5, 10, you know, more and more people that get killed or harmed that way, it's worse and worse. So it's a terrible thing to hurt anybody, but if you're hurting more people and it's more widespread, that's even worse. And, you know, that can go all the way up to the scale of, like, you know, Nazi Germany, people committing genocide against millions of people. So there's basically matters of degree here. There's more and less. A person's action can be better or worse along the moral scale, and it all kind of comes down to the overall amount of pleasure or the reverse that the action created. Now, I have a little even more to say to give further support for the theory, because he does this himself. He tries to further justify the theory by reminding all of us, the reader, that happiness and pleasure is pretty much the only thing that we are seeking in our life anyway. So if every single person's goal is to pursue happiness, then we already kind of recognize it in our own lives as the thing that is good, that is worth seeking. That means that if it's each individual's goal, why not make the maximization of it for all the standard of ethics? So here, let me put the principle that he's going to affirm next. Principle is that happiness, and since pleasure is defined kind of interchangeably with it, I'll put a slash. So happiness / pleasure is the only thing that we all pursue as an end and not as a means. All right, so you see this statement here, and we're going to analyze and explain this as well. So it says happiness or pleasure, either way, same thing. Happiness is the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means. So to drill down into this and kind of clarify, we're going to have to think about the words means and ends, because that's key to the statement. So let's define the 2 terms, ends and means. Starting with ends, okay. Now, I'm sure it's a word that in this type of context, maybe you haven't used too often, but I believe that even if it's hidden in your subconscious mind somewhere, that you actually do have some kind of working understanding of the meaning of the word. So I'm going to try and dredge it up from your memory by asking you to consider this famous saying that some of you probably have heard in your life. And let's think about this saying and maybe what it means. Has anybody ever heard the saying, the expression that the ends justify the means? Anybody know about that saying? If so, if you have heard of it, the ends justify the means, Who could tell me what you have in terms of just what that means? Like, even if it's not fully precise, what is your overall understanding of that statement? Can you say it in other words? Like a child comes to you and they say, hey, I heard this expression, you're a smart college student. What does that mean? The ends justify the means, huh? And you tell them what? Okay, well, I'll tell you actually. It means that, okay, Drew, you say the goal is worth the effort. Kind of, yeah, kind of. That's right in the ballpark of a good analysis. Anybody else have thoughts or some similar contribution to make? That's not too far off. That's pretty close, I think, for the most part. So Megan, you say the outcome justifies how you achieve the outcome. That's very good, and I think that's quite precise. It's basically along those lines. Eva, you say that if the goal is good, the effort is justifiable no matter what. Okay, all those are fair points. 3 very similar ways of phrasing it, but let's bring them all together now. And I see also here, Salzburg, the result of an action justifies the action done, positive or negative. Accurate, yes. Okay, so let me break it down for you guys one time, right? So it means basically that if you have a goal, if the goal is of significant value, if it's important enough, then it kind of like justifies or it makes okay whatever it is that you had to do to get to the goal, to achieve it. Like say, for example, that a person thought, you know, I would never lie, but this time I had to lie because if I had told the truth, the person would have used the information to hurt somebody. So to protect them, which was my goal, I had to tell a lie. But in that case, protecting people is so important that the ends justify the means. Or maybe somebody, you know, stole food for to feed their starving family, and you know the act of theft is usually to be condemned. But they say, well, my family comes first, and their lives are more important than any kind of property. So I know theft is generally wrong, but in this one case, the ends justify the means. So a lot of times people will say that when something a little unsavory or questionable, but they did it merely because they were pursuing a very worthy and noble goal. Okay, so having looked at that explanation, what then do you understand ends to be? So ends justify the means. The ends then are, in other words, the what? Let's see how you define the term end. According to our discussion here. When you say the goal is important enough, you mean it is morally correct, right? Well, Eva, we will have to hold that thought because I guess we're actually debating the content of what makes an action moral or not. I didn't want to put too much weight on the examples that I gave. They're really just used to generate the definition of ends. But we'll come back to the topic of morality proper in just a second here. Generally speaking, though, yes. I don't want to confuse you. Yeah, usually people say that because they think the goal is righteous. It wouldn't be like I had a goal of, you know, killing my grandparents, and you know, one thing I had to do to get that was to obtain poison. But I hate my grandparents. So that's not good at all. So definitely that would be a bad example. But yes, generally. Okay. So then, Drew, results are objective. Yeah. So the end. The end is the goal that you're trying to get to. So it's like the end result, but the one that you want or desire. So what's a desired result? It's an objective or a goal. So ends really are just goals, or you could call them objectives. Now, what are means? Means in relation to the ends are the what? So the end, the goal you're trying to steer towards and get to, ultimately, the result you want. What are the means? In comparison to the ends, the means are, how would you put it? You say plan of action, kind of. Megan, you say the actions that you take. Good, yeah, and also Cameron, actions taken to achieve the end. Perfect, yeah, so that's what it is. The means are the actions that you take or the methods that you use to achieve the goals. Okay, so actions taken and methods used, kind of the same, but just to make it clear, to achieve one's goals, to realize those ends. Okay, so now that we've fully explained the terms here, ends and means, we can return to this principle and fully unpack all of its meaning. What it does say is that happiness or pleasure, and this is according to the writings of Mill. This is again a basis he gives as to why his theory he thinks is the correct moral theory. It says that happiness or pleasure, it's the only thing, it's the only one and only thing that all of us human beings are chasing after as a goal. So that's the only thing that we seek as a goal, as an end, and not as a means. Everything else that we want in our life, everything else aside from happiness and pleasure, is not really sought for its own sake. It's desired itself as a means to the real goal, which is happiness and pleasure. So if the goal of every single person is the pursuit of their happiness, right, then he thinks we already kind of agree with the theory because we exhibit the pursuit of happiness in our individual lives. If that means that we already are kind of motivated by the pursuit of happiness and pleasure, so we recognize that it's a good thing. If we didn't, then we wouldn't be seeking it, but we are. So it's kind of, I think, an interesting. I try to make that seem relatable to you guys by walking you through your current situation a little bit and trying to show you how, in the end, why you're even doing it is because it's going to, you think, lead you to happiness. So let's think about this. Right now, I know you're watching a lecture for your philosophy class. That's what's happening right now. So that's something that you're doing, and you're doing it on purpose. It's not like you're accidentally watching the lecture or you're being forced to do it by some person against your will. So you've chosen to watch the lecture, basically. Well, you must then have a reason to do it. Like, you can't be doing it for no reason. So tell me, what would be the goal behind this? If you're watching this lecture, you're kind of learning this material, you're taking the information in, and you're doing that as a means to what goal? Like, what's the goal behind you even watching this right now? What would be the purpose of that? Let me see if anyone has some basic ideas. Nothing too special, just, but we'll get it out there. So you're watching a lecture. Why? My question to you is why? Okay, so Drew, getting an A. That's good. Let's take it step by step. Even Haley, we could interpose your comment or the ones of Cameron and Megan in there first. So say you want to take this lesson right now from this lecture to learn something, to learn some information about ethics. Okay, good. But why then do you want to learn the material on ethics? So this lecture and the attendance is a means to mastering some material in the textbook. But why do you want to learn it? Learning the material is a means to, I think, Drew, you kind of got to it, and you skipped a step, but you're going to try and learn the material because you want to get a grade of, at least passing, but maybe an A in the class, right? So you're watching the lecture to learn the material, and you're learning the material as a means to getting an A. But why do you want an A in the class? That can't be the last thing in life that you want. You want to get the A, but that itself is a means to a further goal. So you're saying you want to get the A to earn the credits at the end of the semester for this course, or something along those lines, or to graduate. Okay, good. So if you get the A in this class, it'll be one small part of your overall progress towards your degree, which I know that's something you want. That's why you're here in college, right? But ask yourself next, why do you want to graduate? Graduation isn't the final goal. It's not like when you get the degree, you'll just stand there and be like, what? I don't know what to do anymore. That was the only thing I ever wanted. So graduation is a means to a further goal, which is to get an employment or some kind of good career going, a job, as you say, Eva. But why do you want the job? Is it just because you love labor? You like the concept of work? You're like, put me to work. All I want to do is work. No, not really. I mean, you want the job, but the job you want is a means to a further goal. Why do you want the job? Okay, so you say you want the job to make money, and we're very close to the end of this little analysis. Let's go back to the beginning one more time. So you watch a lecture to learn the material in the lecture. That's a means to getting a good grade in the class, which is a means to graduation, which is a means to getting a good career, which is a means to earning money. Now, why do people want money, though? I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? But the money is desired as a means to what? It's a means to the purchasing power for goods and services and for financial stability. But why do you want to have purchasing power for goods and services and have financial stability? Well, there we've reached the end of the line. The reason that you want to have those goods and services that the money can provide is because you think that that's going to make you what? Happy, of course. That'll make you happy, that'll please you. And so if you really look at the biggest picture, every little thing you're doing in your life is towards that goal of the pursuit of happiness. I guarantee you, you wouldn't be even doing this if you didn't think it would lead you to happiness. If someone convinced you that school was just a scam and it would just take a lot of your tuition money and not give you any skills or gainful employment at the end, you'd probably turn around and say, never mind, you know, that's not for me because it's not going to make me happy in the end. But you do believe that this is a part of a pursuit of your happiness, and that's why you're doing it, and that's why you're doing everything. So everything else that you want in life, whether it's money, friends, relationships, experiences, possessions, clothes, you know, all that is desired because of the pleasure that comes from having those things. And so pleasure is really the goal, happiness is the goal, and everything else is desired as a stepping stone on the way towards that big goal. He says you'll recognize that in yourself if you just think on your own situation and why you're doing it. So having recognized this, if it's, you know, if we grant him his argument, that means that we kind of see the primacy, the centrality of the pursuit of happiness in life. So he just magnifies that to the standard of ethics. Try always then in every case where you act to produce the most great amount of pleasure for the greatest number of people affected, and that's how you know that you're doing the morally right thing. Now, I kind of wanted to help you guys think about the way to apply this theory to a concrete particular situation so that it could become a little bit more relatable and realistic to you. So I'm going to erase the board and I'm going to draw a little graph, and we're going to go through a quick little activity to try and explain and you know, articulate the way that it works in a real case. Okay, so here we have a box that we're going to draw in our notes. And within the box, I'm going to place 4 vertical columns like this, and I'm going to cross it with a cross-section of 4 horizontal rows. So that will create this grid of 16 boxes. Okay. Now, in this grid, we're going to create some indices on the top 4 vertical columns and the 4 horizontal rows. So in the top 4 vertical columns, I'm going to place 4 different labels, each one standing for a different type of pizza topping selection. Okay, so everyone in this class, I'm sure you guys have all tried pizza, and you know that there's like some very well-known, popular varieties that everyone's heard of. So we're going to ask, tell me what's one type of pizza topping that's well-known to all. Or, you know, you can call it your favorites if you have requests, but whatever the case is, someone hit me with a type of pizza. Okay, someone says cheese. Megan. Cheese. So here's letter C, which will stand for cheese. Now I need another case. Pepperoni says Paige. Okay, here's the letter P for pepperoni. But we still need 2 more. So not cheese, not pepperoni, but a third possibility. And that could be what? Sausage. Okay, fair enough. There's sausage. And then one more, a 4th option, different from those 3. Who gives me that? Pineapple, veggie. Well, pineapple starts with the letter P also. So as to avoid confusion, I guess I'll just go with veggie. So here's veggie, V. Okay, now, on the left 4 horizontal rows, I want to have just 4 of us here to help out and participate in the little exercise. Now, it doesn't require anything from you except to answer some very simple questions about pizza and your preferences when it comes to pizza. So who in the chat can just give me their voluntary agreement to just help me with this exercise? It'll not really, I mean, we're not even gathered together. So if you're the shy type, maybe you don't feel so shy in this situation. Okay, Megan, there's 1. So Megan, spelling of your name with the H, okay. And then Drew, okay, good. And I'm looking for 2 more. So just let me know. Anthony, sounds good. Finally, Jason, all right. Another lady? Nobody? Sometimes I like to have it equitable, 2 and 2. Not to say I don't want it to be you, Jason, but just throwing that out there. Anybody? Okay, Celine, sounds good. Let's do this. Okay, so anyway, here we have the 4 names, right? And 4 people here, and then 4 types of pizza. Now, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to ask each 4 of you guys, when I come to your name, I want you to basically tell me this info. So we're going to go with the range of numbers 0 to 50. okay? And I want you to give me your rating pretty much on that type of pizza between 0 and 50. And this number, it's going to stand for like basically how much pleasure you would get if that was the choice that had been made. So I want you to kind of right now start thinking, guys that are on the board here, about these 4 types of pizza. And if you had to give a score between 0 and 50 and like just pretend that that represents how much enjoyment, how many like units of happiness you would get from that choice, sort of have your preferences ready to go. So we all understand, right? If you're a person who likes cheese twice as much as pepperoni, then you might say this is like 40 and this is 20. Or if you really love one of them the most, you know, you might say, oh, it's 50 because that's the maximum value. Or if you find this to be almost like disgusting or just really not to your taste, it might be very low on the scale. Cameron, is this like the hedonic calculus? It kind of is a little bit like that, yeah. And I'm just trying to walk you guys through how to use such a calculus to make a real world choice decision according to the theory of the utilitarians. So just to that range of values because I don't want it to be too immeasurably large or whatever. And only you know what your preferences are, right? So we're all unique individuals, and that means that our preferences don't always match up. Sometimes what you think is the best is what another person finds disgusting, and that's okay. But we're going to find out here how to kind of score the various preferences of our 4 students. So we're going to start with Megan. Hey, Megan, tell me what you think about cheese. How do you feel about cheese? If it's between 0 and 50, what do you give cheese? Pleasure score, happiness score. Only you know how you feel about the cheese. Okay, so 45, pretty strong value right there. So cheese lover perhaps, but we don't know. Let's see what the rest is. So tell me about pepperoni then, Megan. What's pepperoni got for you? I wonder, you like it more or less than the cheese, similar? Okay, 35, a little less. We're choosing to go with cheese. Pepperoni you kind of like, but not quite as much. Okay, so now we're talking sausage. What do you think on that option? 10, okay. Not the biggest fan, maybe it's a little greasy. I can kind of relate to that, that's fair. Okay, so then we have veggie also. What's the 4th one? How do you feel about the veggie pizza? Okay, 30. Okay, so we see the breakdown of preferences Megan gave, and that's great. Thank you, Megan. And next up, we got Drew. So Drew, same thing, we're gonna start on the left. Tell me about how you feel when it comes to cheese pizza between 0 and 50. What could it be, Drew? Okay, 43, very precise. So you're discriminating individual in the good sense. Okay, so 43. And then next, pepperoni, what's that? It's like that meme, all the numbers and stuff are floating in front of your face. Okay, anyway. Ooh, 49.7. You're really making it tough on me, but I guess I'll work with what I'm given. 49.7. So you're a huge fan of pepperoni, or I mean, almost as much as could be, but there's more to say. What's sausage in your view? What's your belief? Well, not belief, but, you know, preference, inclination, preference when it comes to sausage. You say 2. Okay, so that's pretty low. Not a lot of love on the sausage so far. That's okay. So veggie. Any thoughts? Veggie. What's veggie according to you? 21.3. Okay, so I can see that if we're talking to Drew, it was just up to you. You'd really prefer the pepperoni, cheese as a close runner-up, and then, you know, veggie is okay. You're really not a fan of sausage that much. Okay, so great. Thank you so much. Now we're talking to Anthony. Anthony, let me know about cheese. What do you think? Okay, 47. So cheese is coming out strong, but what's pepperoni? 50. Okay. Doesn't get better than that. But we still need to know about sausage. What's that? 40. Okay, respectable, but not the highest of the three. And vegetarian. Thinking like bell peppers, mushrooms, onions, and all that stuff. Okay, 20. So your least favorite. Thanks, Anthony. And then so finally we're going to end with Celine. Celine, help me out with cheese. What do you think? What do we say about cheese? Okay, 50. I can see that. Okay, anyway, yeah, that's good. Now I'm talking about pepperoni. What would that be for you? $45. Okay. Sausage? What about sausage? 25. Okay. Kind of right in the middle. And then last but not least, well, maybe least, I don't know, vegetarian. $10. All right. Thank you. Okay, so look, the grid's filled in. We have all these boxes filled up. And everyone, I think, understands that when you look at a box, you see a name linked to a topping selection. And clearly, since we've gone through it, you can understand that what that signifies is that if that individual were to be given that choice, that would be the sort of degree or amount of pleasure that they would derive from that choice. And we see everyone's preferences listed as seen here. Now, suppose you're a utilitarian and you take your moral guidance to be, I'm obligated to do whatever creates the most overall happiness for the greatest number. And suppose you are tasked with ordering for these people in this group, and there's only these 4 options that are available. How would a utilitarian go about determining what's the right action to take here? You'd have to do a simple operation. What would it be? Who can infer how to proceed from here? If you're a utilitarian trying to make the morally correct choice, we simply have to do the operation of what? Let's see if you put this together for me, and then we will do that. But what is it that we have to do next to get to our outcome, to our result? Anthony, well, not so fast, Anthony. I'm asking a meta question, not what the result will be, but how will we obtain it? You say find the average for each one. Well, perhaps that's one way to do it, but I think it's better to go with aggregation. But I'm still waiting for the correct answer. Megan, you're the closest. Add the sum total, exactly true. You're going to add the total for each of the 4 columns, right? That's going to be adding vertically down. And we're going to see 4 sums here at the bottom of each of the 4 columns. Now, what will that total number represent at the bottom? It'll represent the summation, the aggregation of pleasure if that was the choice that had been made. And then whichever one yields the greatest total will be the one to choose. So let's see. I'm going to have to do a little math. 43 and 47 is 90. 50, that's 140, 185. All right, now check my math if I'm getting anything wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. And then, okay, so here, 50, 45, 95, 130. So this would be 180, but there's 0.3 missing, so 179.7. Okay. Next up, it's sausage, 12, 52, 72, 77. Okay, and then finally veggie, 30, 51.3, 71.3, 81.3. All right, now, we see the result. Now you can tell me with clarity, if it's utilitarian theory of ethics, what's the morally obligatory choice? Which action in this case has that status of being the morally obligatory required action? It's cheese, exactly. Why is that? Because cheese here, I'm putting a little asterisk next to it to designate that. It's the one action that creates the most overall pleasure for this set of people that are affected by the choice. So if you're a utilitarian, this is how you calculate what to do. You try and judge in advance of the action what the various options would produce for overall happiness of all affected. And if you can estimate the one act out of those options that would create the most, then that becomes the moral obligation relative to that choice. And the other actions that produce less than that are, by comparison, morally impermissible. So in this situation here, this is the morally right thing to do, and these other things are not, because even though pepperoni is kind of close, it still doesn't generate as much total utility or pleasure. So the theory is called utilitarianism because utility is another interchangeable synonym for pleasure or happiness. So the goal of the utilitarian is to just try and select the action which generates the most pleasure in every case. There's a word that sometimes is used to refer to the action that kind of dominates by having the greatest amount of pleasure associated with it, and that's the word optimific. So this is just jargon that is sometimes used within this theory. This action is the optimific action because it optimizes the maximum amount of pleasure relative to the other options. Now, what I want you to understand is that it's not just about like counting up and taking votes. Sometimes people that learn about utilitarianism kind of misconstrue it. It's a subtle misunderstanding. It's a lot. Take votes, whoever gets the most votes, that's what we should do. Because it's possible to have a situation where there's a minority in terms of just how many people, but with whom greater amount of total pleasure would reside if their favorite action was chosen. So, like think about this. I'm just going to play with the numbers a little bit and change the grid to make a point. I'm going to allow us to violate our rule a little bit here, where it's 0 to 50, just for the sake of making this conceptual point. Suppose that we have this breakdown among our individuals. You see what I did there? So let's imagine that Megan, Anthony, Celine derive no pleasure from cheese, like almost lactose intolerant or something, but Drew is like a cheese fanatic, like just a total cheese, like a lunatic for cheese. I mean, going crazy when they get a cheese pizza, like euphoria for like a week, just through the roof, like out of control pleasure. Okay, now you see here the situation. What would be our morally obligatory choice in this version of the case? Can you see? I mean, I'm not trying to trick you. It's still straightforward. It's to do what? The obligation, the obligatory action relative to this version of our scenario is to order what? It's still to get cheese. Sorry, Eva, because you see the numbers. 180 is bigger than 179.7. It's still greater amount of overall happiness. Now, is it what the majority prefers? No. It's 1 out of 4. It's the total minority. And 3 people are standing there disgusted by the pizza. But it's more overall pleasure. So what you need to know is that it doesn't really matter how equitable the distribution of pleasure is among all the people affected. It just has to be that it's the most total. Now, this situation is not likely to usually happen, but there's a term used in the theory for this. It's the term utility monster. In a situation where one person's preferences so outweigh everybody else's that they kind of get their way by default, that person is known as a utility monster according to the theory. So Drew, in this situation, that's you, the utility monster, who's basically getting to have their way because you vested so much pleasure in the one outcome. Now, in general, there probably will be a more equitable distribution of pleasure in the optimific action, but it doesn't require for that to be. So don't just think that it's majority always rules. It does depend on the intensity of pleasure bound up with the various outcomes for the different individuals. Greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people, yes. But where the happiness or people diverge, happiness is the thing that dominates and outweighs. So if you have less total happiness and a greater number of people, it's to be preferred to act in the way that creates more for the fewer. Yeah? That's sort of how you could justify, like, I don't know, take the example of like capitalism. Maybe some people make a ton of money and a lot of people work and don't have like secure jobs or whatever. But maybe the top end pleasure that the people who are the winners in capitalism can get is so massively, large in the gross aggregation of pleasure that it's better than a system which more equitably distributes pleasure to everybody, but doesn't have as much high intensity for the people who are like on the winning side of it. So I'm just saying that because sometimes people have misunderstood that this is like a socialist type of thinking. It's open-minded to any type of economic or political theory of statehood or government. It is neutral with regard to those topics, because someone could argue that the system that produces the greatest total happiness for human beings is capitalist, or the system that produces the greatest total happiness for human beings is more along a socialist line. That requires argument. The theory doesn't weigh in on any of those questions. It just says whatever the answer is as to what system produces the most total happiness would be the right thing to do. It's not all about politics either. These choices could relate to anything. In this case, it's a trivial choice about pizza, not like life or death or policy. But if you're a utilitarian, you'd make every choice along the same lines. If you're a legislator and the limit was under 50 for the other people, well, Anthony, I know. I played with the values just to make a point here. But the same point I could have made consistent with the previous values. I could have had it be that, I don't know, 3 people have 50 and 1 person has 30. And that would still be more equitable than the distribution seen here, even though it's only greater than it by 0.3. But anyway, yeah, good question. What I was saying, though, just prior to that, was that the same kind of calculus for decision-making would be applied to every choice, including the ones that were very weighty and significant. So if you were trying to choose, what class to take, or what event to go to, or what major to study, whether to marry, how many children to have, where to live, you'd make all decisions with a view towards the maximization of general happiness. If you were a legislator and a bill came before you, and your question is, well, I need to vote on the bill, say yes or no on the bill, you would imagine, well, what are the 2 possible scenarios? The one where it passes, the one where the bill is defeated, and then you would try and judge which one would produce more total happiness for society that's affected by the bill, and you'd vote accordingly. So I'm telling you that decisions all up and down the scale of significance and importance would be made according to this type of thinking if one applied utilitarian reasoning to their moral decisions. They'd always be directing their actions based on this principle. Now, there are some criticisms, of course, of the theory, and I kind of wanted to speak a little bit about those criticisms because my first goal is just to explain the theory itself and to give you an example of how it works and to make it seem initially plausible. But as everything else in philosophy, we're going to have to learn about some objections to this stuff. So I'll open on Friday by briefly discussing with you guys what are some major criticisms of utilitarian ethics, and then we'll transition into another ethical theory so that you get a different look and a whole different approach, and that's the work of Kant. So for Friday, it's going to be mostly Immanuel Kant and the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. That's his writing. And also, though, I'm going to finish up the discussion of Mill by talking about some objections to this. So that's the plan for Friday. And I guess, I don't know, any questions about this material for today's meeting? You can let me know, but I think we've had a pretty good meeting with some good back and forth and some nice examples. So for now, anyway, then, I suppose I'll let you guys go. Thanks so much again. Have a good day. And just don't forget that next Wednesday, your first papers are due. Professor just wanted to confirm the person that Chief's choice is chosen even if the other didn't want it. Yeah, because it doesn't matter what one person wants. Look, forget this column. Suppose this column didn't exist. Let's look at pepperoni. In the case of pepperoni, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to make a very good example out of this because everybody prefers it more than something else. But so say it was like 50, 50, 50, 50, 30. Okay, that adds up to 180, which is still the biggest number in the table. Now, is Celine happy with this choice? Not really, because if it was just up to her as an individual, she'd rather have pepperoni. That's something she likes more. But it's not about the individual in utilitarianism. It's about the general maximization of happiness. So basically, some people are sometimes going to have to sacrifice their favored outcome in order to do the thing that's best for everybody, taking one for the team, as they sometimes say in everyday life. In this case, Celine's taking one for the team because the thing that generates the most pleasure is not necessarily her favorite. But ethics is not just about doing whatever you want in every single case, but doing what's right. And according to utilitarianism, what's right is what creates the most happiness, which you should be able to appreciate, they say, because you want happiness, right? So if you want it, don't you think other people want it too? So make more of it rather than less. And if you have a choice to make more instead of less, the right thing is to create more. That's all they're saying. But there's still objections that we're definitely going to have to talk about. So keep it on your mind, and I'll see you guys back then on Friday. Have a good day then. Until then. All right, guys. Bye-bye.